Right, Can. I was trying to find it, a fantastic quote. Um, if you, I don't know if you can remember it, about people that have learned and stopped learning and people that continue to learn. Can you remember what it was? Because I can't find it anywhere.
Yes, that would be the Eric Hoffer quote. It's one of my favourites. In times of change, the learners inherit the earth, whereas the learned become beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists.
And that's obviously you are always striving to keep learning because you're finding these different edges and trying and failing, and then finding the successful ones. Is there a basic, a very very I know you've written it all about it, but for people watching this, an absolute basic that every aspiring trader needs to learn to start them off, fundamentals?
Sure. So that developing and evolving that you're kind of hinting at with that quote there is extremely important. You need to be aware that you're going to have to do that going into the future, but it's really important that you actually understand the characteristics for each situation because that will help massively. The fuller you understand the characteristics of the situation, and I mean in terms of betting as well as also the sport, but more so the betting market, the easier it becomes because you need to understand where the limitations are, those boundaries, the likely characteristics in certain situations, so that you can manage a situation whereas there's more reward on offer than risk ultimately. And that includes behaviours that are associated with the marketplace also and the people operating within them. So a good example would be in horse racing, the media often talks exclusively about the horses or the jockeys or recent runs and stuff like that. But really, I would look at it from a different angle altogether. I'd still be looking at it, but I'd be looking at the sense of is it a handicap? When was its last run? Has it been an extended break? Was it weighted at a bad mark?
Okay, so that's interesting. So you say in your book that it's about figures and it's about uh, prices, but you still do your homework as informed study.
Well, not really. Okay, I guess you could call it form study in a sense, but looking at things from a different angle. Okay, so prime example, obviously, Curly passed away last week. If he had a horse in a race that hasn't run for 500 days, I know that the price is either going to go up massively when there's no money backing it, or it's going to go in massively when there is money backing it. So I'm looking in the non-traditional sense of what is the key indicator that that might happen, and that might be a situation. Obviously, it happens in lots of different situations, but you need to understand the angle that you're looking at it from, and then work backwards. So a popular way is that newbies start out with trading is backing delay at the start of a race based on the horse's routine behaviour and characteristics. So you have some horses maybe on a national hunt, you'll see them lining up, they're dying to go, they bounce out straight away, and you can nab a few ticks early on. So yeah.
Okay, now anyone that follows any whatever way they do it of being a professional gambler, for want of a better word, put themselves under massive pressure. I know you say that you're comfortable now, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if you had to stop doing it. But how do you cope, especially in your earlier days, when I assume you didn't have such a tank behind you, with that massive pressure? And do you find even now that mental health can be an issue if you're having a terrible bad run or things aren't going right? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, so okay, so there's a lot to that. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to remember, no matter who you are, whether it's me or some other professional or somebody off the street, we're all human. So we're all aware and susceptible to that kind of stuff. And it's something that I blogged about a lot early on. But the more self-aware you are, the easier it becomes to manage those issues that you're talking about there. And I think over a period of time, more experience in the markets, taking risk, it becomes slightly easier. That's one of those things that you can't learn from reading, unfortunately. And there has been pressure, and it has been hard at points for me. Maybe I've taken it out on people around me at times when I shouldn't have. I'm fully aware of that. But I think really it's just kind of getting yourself set up as best you can so that you're affected less and less by those situations, and not
Do you think that being at the bottom of a trench with people shooting at you has put things in perspective to help you in that?
yeah, possibly. Yeah, quite possibly. But not to have yourself in a situation where you take too much risk. Now, one thing I actually remember from last week, having seen the passing of Varney Curley, was that it wasn't really covered much in the press, but he had tuberculosis when he was a teenager. That stood out to me because I thought, yeah, I can understand more behind who he was and maybe some of his behaviours, because he'd been to rock bottom. He'd already, he'd hit the bottom and his lowest low. So a lot of the time, taking risk later on in his life was probably less of an issue, and he probably cared less about it. So yeah, that's probably my angle on that one there.
Okay, so how you're working? I assume you work from home, and you how do you sort of manage? How do you manage your time?
Okay, so I've had several different offices in the past. Obviously, with the current situation, I've now built one down the end of the garden, so that's where I am right now. But having that separation is important. Obviously, if you're spending 800 quid a month on office rent, it gets a little bit more pricey and stuff. But it is important that you have some kind of separation from the rest of the world. I remember those days where young kids knocking on the door, dog running in around your feet, stuff like that. It's just not what you need when you're trying to manage risk and you're playing with money, particularly with higher stakes. So
I feel you. I know exactly what you're saying.
excluding the situation where the missus comes in her underwear, obviously. But yeah, I think it's really important that you have that separation. You manage that environment so it's as comfortable and easy for you to not get yourself on that slippery slope, and treat it like a job, really. I mean, none of us want a job. That's not why we come into betting. We want the easy money fast. Completely get that. But the easier it becomes easier, the more you set yourself up for success, if that makes sense.
Um, I used to work for racehorse bookmakers, and there'd be times it was a pouring down the rain on a useless Tuesday, and there'd be bookmakers turning up to bet in pitches that were obviously going to be no good whatsoever. I mean, and my boss used to say, "Oh, they're addicted. They can't leave it alone just in case there's a load of results and things." I mean, how important is it to take total time out? Do you take total time out, and just forget it all for a period of time?
So I do have time out. I struggle to switch off as a person, if I'm honest. So I like a holiday. I do get breaks away. If you've seen the blog, I have quite a lot of holidays. But whether I'm laying on a sun lounger in Greece or somewhere else, I'm still usually thinking. My mind's ticking over. I do find it hard to switch off. So factoring them in is kind of important, but ultimately it depends on the type of person you are. But I guess that sort of is part of the reason that I've succeeded. You need to have a break from it because you'll just drive yourself nuts otherwise. But I think, and this sounds cliche again, but the more you enjoy it, the easier it becomes and the less stressful it is. And so, it's less of an issue, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Is that laying on a sun lounger and not being able to switch off something that you wish you could change?
At points, yeah. Yeah, I think at points it's been a little bit tricky to manage and borderline obsessive. It's probably a bit different to your race course situation. Sounds
Fear of missing out, that was called. They were worried they were going to get 6 big price winners, and they didn't get anything, but they wouldn't have got anything much anyway. But that was the
yeah, that sounds more like borderline addiction, if I'm honest. And they're sort of aiming for the short term there. But I've had situations where it's like, I'll just nip into the office because I can trade 2 more races and get an extra 50 quid, 60 quid, nice and easy, and I can't leave it alone. So that is not healthy, obviously. If you do it too much, you can lose friends and other stuff around.
I mean, it does sound like a problem everybody would like to have, where most people lose that. You get that good, you think I can just go and nick another 50 quid. I mean, that must be when you get to that position, that must be a very hard thing to try and resist. Wake up in the night and go and nick 50 quid off of Australian racing or something like that. I mean, is that a thing really that you've got to stop yourself doing that?
Yeah, and I've done it in the past. It can be really unhealthy, like situations you're like, my God, I can't have a Saturday off. And I remember talking to Steve Howe, another pro trader that was promoted by Betfair in 2014, and it's like it's not worth missing out on certain events in life for the sake of an extra 50, 60 quid. Now I know if you need the money, you might feel a little bit different about that, but it's about balance, really. I mean, wasting opportunity is one thing. If you know that there's going to be a race, it's going to take 10 minutes and you're going to get 200 quid easy, you should be doing that. But then on the other side, there's no point being too obsessive about it either, because really it's a negative thing overall, which it's just.
Okay, right. Coming to this is people want to get to that position you've just talked about. There's the people that are watching this want to be able to emulate Canberry and go and nick 50 quid whenever they feel like it. Um, Three things to finish with. The biggest pitfall people need to avoid.
The biggest pitfall. So many things I could say. Um, Emotion. Emotion has to be the biggest. It's the biggest problem for each and every one of us that trade. Whether you're new, starting out, or you're full time, you've been doing it for years, it still affects you, and it can catch you out. So you don't want to end up in a situation where you end up like going on the chase, or you feel like you've missed out on something, so you do something irrational. You want to be completely rational, calm, devoid of emotion as much as possible, and structure the situation so that is the case, and life is easier.
Okay, and what somebody that wants to start to gain confidence and experience, which would be the best market to start trying to trade in?
That's a common question, and it's not the easiest one to answer because I mean they've all just got different pros and cons. So I would say pick a market that you certainly enjoy, no question. If you don't enjoy it, you won't do it enough. Stick to one marketplace if you can, and one situation within that marketplace. So you've got like a solid environment to either fail or succeed in. Yeah, but it's not a moving variable environment. So a primary example of that in horse racing trading, somebody might say, "Oh, I've got to trade 5 races because I trade horse racing," which is true. But you might have a maiden followed by a novice followed by a group three followed by a handicap. They're all different environments. Okay, you need to focus on one of those individually, drill down, and then prove or disprove what you're doing, and ultimately make it work or fail.
Okay, and finally, one piece of advice that you wish you'd been given before you sat down to ever play on these things, but wasn't.
In terms of training itself, or
Any aspect of what you do now, that if you could have been told before you sit down, can in front of that computer, this is your bit of advice that would have saved you a lot of pain or losses or sleepless nights. Anything that you wish you could impart to people that you wish you'd known but didn't at the start.
I think really it probably boils down to a mixture of the last two answers, but probably more the second one about focus. You've got to focus, like completely pinpoint what you're doing, stay with it, because it's too easy to jump around, try something new, try a different. And it's fine for me to say this, having traded multiple sports, different environments, but become a master in one of them first before you carry it over. Don't jump around. Give yourself a reliable, structured environment to operate in, so that you actually know whether you're going forward or backwards, and it's really quite crystal clear whether you're recording on a spreadsheet or in your profit and loss or whatever it may be. But it's probably the worst thing in the world, and I spent a fair bit of time doing that early on, jumping around from one thing to another, trying to find the next hot thing, and ultimately you get nowhere in the end. So focus on one thing, stick with it, become a master of it, and don't leave it alone until you do.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that. Anyone that's had their appetite whetted by this, what's the name of is it just Canberry, your channel on YouTube?
Uh, yes, Carnberry Pro Trader.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for your time, Canberry. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.